Welcome to the All In Podcast, the show that explores how the top real estate entrepreneurs have gone all in on their businesses. I'm your host, David Morse, with my co-host, Joe Quattrucci, and I invite you to come along with us as we explore the stories of the most elite professionals in the game today to learn how they went all in and how you and I can do the same. So I just have to ask, are you all in? Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the All In Podcast. You know me, I'm your host, David Moore, CEO and team leader of Keller Williams Arizona Realty in Scottsdale, as well as soon to be a new office as well on High Street in Phoenix, a new luxury office. I'm pumped about that. I'm with my co-host,
Joe Quattrucci. I'm the Director of Growth, Kristen Poole Real Estate Network and Expansion Team all over the United States, and simultaneously working here in the Market Center with the Productivity Coaching Program.
Awesome. And today, guys, we have 4 powerhouse business leaders. We are thrilled to introduce you to the Empire Builders, Sarah Reynolds, Vija Williams, Wendy Papasan, Seychelle Van Poole. Guys, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So incredible to have all of you here. I know that this podcast is going to be filled with an enormous amount of value for our listeners. Let's quickly kind of go around and introduce yourself and what business you're in. What do you do?
Go ahead, Wendy.
I'll start. So I'm Wendy Papasan, and I run the Papasan Properties Group at Keller Williams here in Austin, Texas. We have a few expansion teams. We've got a team in Dallas, Texas. We've got a team in Houston. And we've got a team in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In addition to residential real estate, I also run the investing side of our empire. And we have a lot of properties that we have acquired over the years. And I also run a Papasan Home Services, which is remodeling, repair, and subscription home maintenance. And I have a little passion project. It's called Amplify. I'm one of the co-founders with my lovely ladies here. And it helps women live really big lives and amplifies the lives and voices of women in business. And I think that's all. Yeah,
good.
That's enough.
Just a slight few things.
That's enough. Yeah.
And then of course, you should probably fill your calendar a little more, Wendy.
Yeah, of course. And then of course, I'm a mom of 2 teenagers. So I have a 14-year-old and almost 16-year-old, and I'm the wife of a busy executive.
That's awesome. I'm Seychelle Van Poole from Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. We have Van Poole Properties here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and also in Austin. And we sold just about $100 million in sales last year. We also have an insurance company, real estate investment company called Edgewood Real Estate that does remodels and flips. And then a property management company that we built up and sold off a couple of years ago. All 4 of us are co-founders of Amplify, and that's something we are definitely really passionate about, is amplifying the voices and lives of women around the world. And then I have a 6-year-old little girl named Quinn who is learning how to bike. So I'm getting in lots of running and sprinting and miles right now this week with her, chasing after that bike. And my husband, Nick, is a real estate investor himself.
Awesome. Love that, Seychelle. I'm Sarah Reynolds, and I'm so grateful that you're having us on today. I lead a real estate business out of the DC metro market. So we service Northern Virginia, Washington, DC, and Maryland. We also have 2 expansion teams in Richmond, Virginia, and Atlanta, Georgia. And then in addition to that, we have a title company. And of course, my amazing co-host talked about Amplify. And I have 3 young kids, 7-year-old, almost 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old tomorrow. And also a proud wife.
That's awesome. And Sarah, we had you as our special guest back on episode number 4. So everyone wants to go check that out for sure.
It was fun.
Oh yeah, everybody has to check that one out. My name's Vija Williams, and thank you guys so much for having us on. We're super grateful to be here today. I'm in the Seattle, Washington area, and I counted it up. I am involved in the leading and operating of 13 different entities. So I'm the director of growth for the Ben Kinney companies, and we have 8 market centers, real estate offices here in Western Washington that I am the general manager of. I'm involved in our leadership team on mortgage title escrow. BKCO Mortgage Title Escrow is what it's called. I've got the Via Group Residential Real Estate. My husband and I have a property management company. I've got a podcast, Empire Building Podcast. And lastly, and very much not leastly, with 10 of my besties, we have Amplify, which everyone here has mentioned.
I mean, I don't know if people are picking up on this, but between you, there's about 20 to 25 different full-time jobs that you guys are all juggling.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
In addition to mom and wife and
I should have said that. I didn't even say that.
and-
I have 3 kids. I have a husband and 3 kids, and
a brand new puppy. Don't forget the
and a
puppy.
brand new puppy.
Yeah.
So
Cutest
that's
puppy.
4 more entities.
I know, it really
5 more.
is. It really is.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie.
Well, and it's really interesting, guys. That's something that really brought us all together. And the 11 of us that founded Amplify, that was a commonality that we all had, was we were leaders in businesses, leaders in our home life, right? Having, had kids, and all had marriages, and marriages we want to keep, and we want to have healthy relationships with our family and our children and still build really big businesses. And I think what I love about what you guys are doing with your podcast is with All In is having that conversation around how do you have a big business and have an even bigger life with that. So we really appreciate that you guys are tackling that topic, because that's what we're all about. It's something we're very passionate about.
Well, and I love that, Seychelle, because I know I've had many people come to me just thanking me for being a role model, right? Sometimes all we need to do is see that it can be achieved.
That's right.
And then, so for me, that's very, very personally rewarding, is to know that there are people out there listening who maybe think that it can't be done. And I'm not saying that we do it all, that's a myth.
Or do it all well.
Right? We don't do it all well. And life is a counterbalance, not a balance. But I think sometimes it's nice to surround yourself with people who are doing it at a high level and also failing forward at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah, we talk a lot on this podcast about surrounding yourself with the people that you desire to be in the company of, right? And I know for Joe and I, like you are for those people who we know personally, we get to learn from, and how you're doing it, how you're failing for it, how it's not perfect, how it's messy, but how you are still uniting and coming together and propelling one another into greater levels of success. And I think that's huge. So you
Can I
guys
just jump in on that really quick? Because
Go
I think
for it.
what you said was so important, and I just don't want it to be missed. Because it's the All In podcast, and you guys are talking about having a really big life, and that's what we talk about. You have got to be comfortable with a mess.
Yes.
You can't build a big life and be all in without a mess. And I just didn't want to gloss over that. That is part of this journey and part of the growth. And it's at a certain point, you have to accept it.
Mm-hmm. And the bigger your life gets, the messier it gets.
Messier. Yeah.
I used to think that was going to be the opposite. I'm not going to lie. I thought the bigger my world gets, the more income you make, the more net worth you have, the more leverage you get in your life, the easier it gets and the cleaner it gets. And man, that was not true.
Weird.
It was really not true.
So picking up on that point, Seychelle, like the question pops into my head then, like why do you keep doing it? Like I think a lot of us, we start to get into business, we want to drive our own success, we want the freedom, we want the flexibility, we want all of the financial gain, right? And then we find that it gets messier and messier. In your lives, how has your why adjusted? How has it changed? How has it grown to a place where you're okay with it getting messier? Like what's the driving purpose and motivation behind it?
Dave, that's such a good question. I think it starts off with an internal desire to help more people than just myself. And if you want to have a big impact on a lot of people and help move the ball forward for not just you or just your small nucleus of a family, but really have a big impact on a lot of people, then I think you're going to have to become comfortable with having a bigger life, with having goals that are bigger than yourself. And in our organization, the way they're always set up is if I can help enough other people get what they want, right? And that sounds familiar to a lot of us, right? If I can help enough people get what they want, then I'm always going to have more than I need. And I think on that path also, though, because it is messy, it's because, as Wendy said beautifully, it's because you're counterbalancing. in one instance, I'm working harder than I ever have this year. And I'm working harder probably to make a tougher net income than I've ever made this year. And at the same time, I'm prepping to go up to Northern Michigan with my family for 3.5 to 4 weeks at the end of July. And so, I'm busting my buns now because I know that I'm going to have a little bit of an eject button and go get to live a big life on Lake Michigan for 3 to 4 weeks and get to go enjoy that intense quality family time that will be a complete counterbalance going in the other direction. So I think it just depends on how you define and what you're willing to accept with the messy to get to where you want to go.
I think that was so good, Seychelle, and I want to sort of continue that conversation because I think when we talk about messy, it really comes down to, and many of you said, it gets messier as your world gets bigger. And what's getting bigger? It's people around you. I have 108 people in my organization now. I mean, that's not a small, Gary Keller said to me, that's a third of Keller Williams International. It's not a small company, anymore. And that's what gets messy is you're dealing with people but that's also what brings you the biggest joy, right? My dad has always said, like, people will bring you the biggest heartache, but they will also bring you the biggest joy.
I love that.
And I think that's where the impact piece is so critical. I think that's why we keep doing it, because we're changing and impacting people's lives. And you guys are doing this by having this podcast. We're doing it by having ours, and it's continuing the message on changing people's lives and having an impact on people. That's why we keep doing it, because we're passionate about people.
Yeah, I love that. And I know last year when I lost 26 people in my organization last year. And I remember turning to my director of operations at that time and just saying, like, you know what, can we just shut down and run a factory that sells widgets or something like that? That's all automated, robots, no people. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Drop shipping.
But Sarah said it so beautifully. It is about the people. And at the end of the day, you don't have to, your empire is your empire. I'll just say that. Right. I would encourage everyone to live their best life possible. Right. But your best life isn't my best life. And when you're on a growth journey to lead your best life, it's naturally going to get bigger and bigger over time. When I started my real estate business, my goal was to save money on investment properties. That's literally why I started my real estate business. I wanted to make $15,000 that first year to buy an investment property. That was it. That was my goal. Which is slightly embarrassing. And now my big why, my mission has morphed into empowering and inspiring big thinking leaders to create lives of abundance. And that's an 11-year journey for me, going from something that's pretty simplistic, it doesn't involve anyone, to this mission that honestly, guys, it's never gonna end, right? It's never gonna end. And that's why I'm here on this podcast, right? Taking away time from my family and other businesses, because I'm here to empower and inspire big thinking leaders to create lives of abundance. And your abundance is your abundance, right? We don't need to compare each other.
Right.
Wendy, I found myself thinking when you were saying that, how our origins, because you guys were asking about motivation, what drives us, what's our why? And my why started, individually, I guess selfishly, for lack of a better term, as well. My big why really has always been this fear of, what is that expression? Hell on earth is coming to the last day of your life and meeting the person you could have been or should have been, right? That's been that drove me. And then what started driving me was helping people around me achieve their goals. And the more I was getting fed by that, the more people I wanted to impact. And it became a positive spiral, like these guys are saying, as your world gets bigger and it becomes hundreds of people and then thousands of people, and then maybe even tens of thousands of people. And for the very rare few, 100,000 people, 1 million people,
or
look at Tony Robbins, yeah. And
or even look at Jane Garing with the One Thing book. That's totally 2 million copies sold. Who would have thought, right?
Who would have thought?
Yeah.
Amazing.
So let me ask you guys this question. When things are a little messy and you're in the heat of the moment and there's chaos, you're dealing with all these different people, talk to me about how you're able to maintain your composure. And more specifically, I guess what I'm asking about is emotional intelligence. And how do you define emotional intelligence? How important is that in your roles as leaders?
Does wine count?
Absolutely.
I'm happy to
Yeah.
jump in. I work really hard. So for me, on EQ, there's kind of 5 tenets of EQ. I work really hard on emotional regulation. I run hot. So I'm not someone that's naturally even keeled, right? I have high highs and low lows. I call myself passionate. You can use your own words. Papasan, you can use your own words privately. But the bottom line is that I have to really, really work on emotional regulation. So when you say staying calm, that has to be really purposeful. And what I can share with you is the behavior has come first, and then pretty soon. So in other words, I was volatile in my head at first when I started working on it, and I was modifying my behavior. And by modifying my behavior, I actually am a lot calmer in my head now too. So I started from the outside in on that, which is, unusual. I think a lot of the times we're taught that like mindset's first and behavior second. And for me, a lot of EQ is about behavior. Like in one of our podcasts, you guys, that we just recorded, Sarah was talking about, and you might want to share it, but saying thank you. And Wendy made a point during the podcast that we have to sometimes literally remind ourselves and put things on our phone to remind ourselves to be grateful for people and thank them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So powerful.
Definitely.
Well, I think
I was talking to another person that you guys all know, Brady Sandahl, who's a huge agent out of Palm Springs, and he does the 5x5. He calls it his 5x5. And he talks, it's just like 5, I have to talk to 5 people. I have to say thank you to 5 people. And that's sometimes we need those reminders, even though we may naturally be a grateful person, but sometimes we need to schedule the behavior into our calendar.
That's right. Yeah. Build it into a system. And then all of a sudden now you can build on that and expand it where it's not just you doing it, it's your whole organization doing it. Right.
And it becomes a habit.
That's right.
Wendy, you mentioned something, regarding, your abundance isn't someone else's abundance necessarily. And like the world that you're trying to build isn't necessarily the empire that someone else is trying to build. And I think a lot of people want to know, where do you start on this journey, right? Like what was the first step into building an empire? Could you guys talk to us a little bit about people who are just getting into real estate or just getting into business, just getting into parenthood, whatever? How do you decide where to start?
Yeah, well, I think you start just by you start by doing, right?
Yes.
A lot of people who are in real estate, they know it all. Not that they're know-it-alls, but they know it all. They've educationed themselves to death, and yet they've never taken that first step, right? So I think everyone has a place where they start. Like I know for me, I grew up in what I would consider with more of like a scarcity mentality versus an abundance mentality. And I had a big aha moment once when I was talking to my grandmother, and she had made this really big pot of sweet corn. And on top of the pot of sweet corn was a corn cob that was brown, and the kernels weren't puffed up. And I remember just saying to her, "Grandma, hey, maybe we should throw that one away." And she looked me right in the eye and she said, "Wendy, I thought if there wasn't enough to eat, then that would be the one that I would have." And while that's a totally selfless woman speaking, at the same time, it was a light bulb for me where I realized, wow, I come from a long line of people for whom bad food is okay, and I just seen that perpetuated in my family where, kind of like mediocre is good enough and we don't deserve that. And so like, I've always had that kind of scarcity mentality where I wanted to just save everything.
Yes.
And so abundance mindset is a journey that you can go on. And it's also a muscle that you can develop over time. And the quickest way to change your thinking about the world and your viewpoint and to think bigger is to surround yourself with people who are thinking at a different level than you. So I would just acknowledge, like, everyone has their level that they start with. And so surround yourself with great people, take that first step, read a lot. I read somewhere this week that Warren Buffett reads 500 pages a day. Wow. I mean, if that's not convicting, and the ROI on a $15 book right?
Mhm.
What's the ROI on reading a copy of The One Thing or The Millionaire Real
Yeah.
Estate or any of those other things? So that's really all the steps is like, just take the leap,
Yep.
pour into yourself educationally, and then surround yourself by people who are at a different level than you.
And I know, Sarah, you want to jump in here. Where you started, take action.
Yeah, well said.
What's the ROI on a $15 book? It all depends on whether it sits on the shelf and you go do something with it,
Yeah.
or not, right? So
Yeah.
action is always going to be the differentiator.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's important for everyone listening to this episode to recognize how are you taking action? Even when you turn off this episode, what's the action plan? How are you going to go win the next hour after this podcast?
Well, and I don't mean to dominate the conversation. I feel like I am, so I'm sorry, guys. But I also feel that I think sometimes people think that that people who are leading a big life don't feel fear, right? And the reality is we're all fearful of taking that leap. So if you're feeling fearful of taking the leap, just understand that we all felt fearful. I can remember walking around my office, those first few weeks being a realtor and being terrified, being so scared, not knowing what to do, and yet doing it anyway.
Yeah. I talked to my team this morning about, comfort in your comfort zone can be a beautiful place to be, but nothing grows there. So if you want to grow, you got to get out of your comfort zone. And it's such a critical thing. And how you do that is by taking action. And I love the way that Wendy answered that question is like, you've got to do. I remember when I first got my real estate license, I took an in-person class. I didn't do online, and I made friends with this other girl, and I ran into her at like a broker's, something real estate related. I don't remember what it was, like 7 months later. And I had sold a good amount of homes in 7 months. And I said, hey, how's it been going? Like, how's your first 7 months? And she goes, I'm just now ready. And I was like, oh, okay. And she said, my office is now ready. And I was like, oh, okay. And I said, what do you mean? And she's like, I've been getting my office ready. And I said, for 7 months? Like, and I find a lot of realtors get paralyzed of the getting ready, like taking all the classes and getting ready, and you're going to do stuff and you're going to mess up and you're going to fail but the main thing is to do the actions, get things done. And for me, what I did, and I always forget to share this, but I think it was a critical thing for me, is like I always pinpointed a few people that were like one step ahead of me. And I became their best friend. Like if I sold 24 homes and there was someone in my office that sold 36, and that was the goal for me that next year, I was taking them to lunch, I was taking them to coffee, I wanted to get to that next step. And I think that that's a big piece too, of like surrounding yourself by who you want to become is a big part of that as well.
That exact point is something that I call, when I'm coaching agents, business drafting, right? I'm not going to be Gary Keller tomorrow, but I can be this person. And so how do I hug their shoulder, right? Like if anyone listening runs, if any of you run, you pick that person who's going to push you, whose shoulder you can hug, and that's a draft position. And if you can do that, we know that the majority of the time you're going to be able to overtake that person. And then you pick the next person to draft. And so, Sarah, your point there is huge. Who's the person that you can draft, who's just a few steps ahead of you, that's going to push you, stretch you out of your comfort zone to grow and hit your goals?
Yep.
I love, David, that you're using the running analogy, because that's where I was going to go when you asked, where do you start? Last year, my daughter, her little adorable Montessori school, she was like 4, turning 5. And she told the head of her little school that she told her a secret. And so the director comes up to me at the end of the day and she's like, hey, Seychelle, I heard your family has like a really exciting secret. And anytime someone says that to you, you're like, I'm not going to tell you all of my inner secrets. You tell me what you know. It's like, share in mine. What do you know that I don't know? And she goes, oh, well, I heard that Quinn's expecting a baby sister. And I was like, oh, that's news to me, right? And so I'm kind of like trying to figure out how I like approach this with a 4-year-old, and we're sitting in the car on the way. We're talking about the day, I ask her, I say, so Quinn, I heard you told Miss Cat that we're expecting a baby sister today. And she was like, yeah. And we're like getting her stuff out of the car and she's really excited talking about it. And I was like, well, how do you know that you're expecting a baby sister? And she was like, Mama, I can see it. She's like, pats my belly.
Oh, no.
And so that was the day I became a runner, which was so exciting.
Now I see where you're going.
And how do you start becoming a runner, right? You don't immediately go out and run a mile or 2 miles or 10 or 20 miles. You run with a right left. That's how you run, right? And so you run with right, left, right, left, right, left. And if you do enough of those, right? And to your point that you beautifully said, you take action, right? Then you've earned the right where then you can draft off of somebody else. But if you don't start with a right step and a left step, right? You're still sitting 7 months down the road in your office, trying to get it ready.
Yeah.
Right.
Beautiful.
You have to
This
start
is,
with
you
a
know
right
what this reminds me of, you guys?
With-
I had an agent
Now
last week.
I
and
can
she-
eat all the
she goes,
tacos
"How
I
do you
want because
run
I
a
run."
real estate empire with 2 kids, is what she said. And I go, oh, wow, you have 2 kids? She goes, no, but I want 2 kids. And I'm just so overwhelmed and I don't know what to do. And I look at you and I look at all these women that are doing it and it freaks me out. And I said to her, you know what's interesting? You don't give birth to an 8 and 10-year-old. What's interesting is you give birth to like a 1-day-old, right? And you figure out how to have an empire with a 1-day-old because it's Tuesday when you give birth, and on Tuesday you figure out what to do on Tuesday. But you have this goal in front of you, and you just figure out what the next base camp is.
Yeah.
And one day you realize I have to figure out how to run an empire with a 6-month-old who can crawl. You figure that out, right? And then the other really good news is then they start walking and talking, and every step of the way you get to figure it out. You do not have to know and project what it's going to look like when they're 8 and 10. You don't even know if you're going to have kids, right? So I think that people get a little frozen, like getting their office ready for 7 months, frozen, right? Because they're projecting this really big future outcome. And the example I always give is a mountain. Everyone stares at the summit and they get frozen. What we really need to look at is just where the next camp is. Just get there, because when you sell 24 homes, you know a lot more then, and you'll start figuring out what 36 and 48 homes looks like. But you just don't know what you don't know right now. So you just have to start.
That's right.
Yep.
I love that we're talking about this whole action, taking actions and what's the next logical domino in the growth journey, and how it all really kind of evolves around mindset. We touched on how we all have different experiences and upbringings, and the way that I was taught to about money and success and a joyful life is very different from all of you. And it reminds me of, the acronym that I use is PTFAR, Programming, Thoughts, Feelings, Actions, Results. And the idea is that any particular action will lead to a result, and that result will give your brain new data to interpret, which is going to lead to conscious thoughts, the way you feel about things, and in turn, of course, your next action. And so it's all this perpetual cycle that can be either very positive or very negative if you allow it to be. And so you've got to regain control of that cycle by taking one small positive action that will reset the cycle and gain you momentum.
Well, and I think another way of putting that is you can grow, doing the ability to do hard things is actually a muscle. And the harder things you do, the more you have the ability to do more hard things. I mean, I can give you an example. So when we first started real estate investing, I can remember one of our tenants called and the air conditioner went out. And this was 15 years ago, just when we were starting building our real estate holdings. And, we probably talked about it for the whole weekend. Like, what do we do? And what are the tenants going to say? And blah, 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 and all this stuff. And now if a tenant calls, well, first of all, I don't even take the call.
Yeah.
Right. And yet that's a muscle that's been built up over the last 15 years. And so the more hard things you do, the more hard things you are able to do.
That's so good.
You're exactly right. That air conditioning example makes me think of my squirrel. I thought you meant in your head. For me, it was a squirrel in my investment portfolio. Damn squirrels. Oh, no, well, not in my head. No, in my gutters.
So along the lines of, the more you do, the more you can do. I mean, in the midst of everything you all just mentioned, you guys just released your Empire Building podcast in June. Tell us a little bit about that. What was the idea behind it, and what can the listeners of the Empire Building podcast expect to hear about?
Yeah, so our focus, we're super excited about our podcast, and Wendy can go into sort of the origin of how our group sort of got together. But the real big focus has been on having not only a big business, but an even bigger life, which is a lot of what we talked about. And it all comes down to all of us are in a tribe of women that have big businesses and also big lives that we call the 5 dolls. And this is a group of females that are amazing powerhouses in terms of our businesses. And at the same time, we're all wives, we're all moms. And we desire a lot for one another. And I would love for Wendy to sort of share about, she's who started it with Diane Griffin and just the origin of that. And it led to us starting Amplify together because our passion is really impacting women's lives and business around the world. And then it led to now the podcast. So it's sort of been a transition, but I would love for Wendy to sort of share that origin story because I think that's important.
Well, thank you, Sarah. And I think it's really, I feel a theme coming on here, which is having an idea, taking action, getting better with it over time.
So true.
And that's really how 5 Dolls started. So I joined EO, which is Entrepreneurs Organization, and you need to have a business with $1 million in revenue to join that organization. Austin has the largest chapter. There was 144 people there, and unfortunately, only about 10% are women. So there's only 14 out of 144, and they actually group you up where you have to apply to be in one of the subgroups. And I went through the motions, and often I was having lunch with 9 men and having conversations about beards and stuff like that. And so even though it cost $7,000, I finally was like, this is not for me. I'm out of here. This is not for me. You guys are awesome, and this isn't the right tribe for me. And so then I was really searching for something else. And so then I was talking to my friend Diane. She was out at our ranch, and we started having a conversation about a different group that was all men. And it 5 Dolls kind of started as a prank, really. Mm-hmm. And then as we grew, we realized, I remember turning to Diane and saying hey, I think we have something here. We're creating something. And so we started to have masterminds, and now we mastermind all over the world twice a year. And we talk about everything. We talk about leverage and leadership and being a mom and being a wife and all of the things. And then all of a sudden you look up and this little spark, right? This little tiny spark of an idea that you had, it turns into, we had an event last year with over 200 attendees. And now we're about to launch a podcast, and it's just one thing. It was just one little step, and being brave and being brave again and being brave again and being brave again. And then all of a sudden you look up and you're an empire builder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and I love that you shared that story, Wendy, because I think one thing that all of us in the 5 Dolls found is that we all were in a position where we were leadership lonely, that we have great social friend groups in the cities we're in. It's not that we don't have friendships, but it was that we were lacking a group that understood maybe some of the challenges that we go through, and also that could have radical transparency. That literally, this group is so invested in your success, almost from an external care, right? Because it's not my decision is not necessarily going to make or break Via or Sarah or Wendy or Diane or anybody else in the group. But my decisions, they will watch unfold as a friend and a mentor and somebody that's a part of the tribe. And so by starting the group Amplify, our goal was to help create that tribal community where the strongest and the weakest person of that group dictate the group, right? And at any given time, someone is in the high or the low that needs to be lifted up. And getting into that tribal mentality really, I think, gave us all a safe communal space that we didn't know how badly we needed until we got in there. And that strength and that support, I think, has given us so much inner courage to pursue our dreams and our
and
goals
here's what
and
I
our
know,
businesses and
Seychelle.
our
So well
marriages
said.
and our lives.
What I
at a
know is
bigger
we
level
are
than
we are
ever could
exemplifying
have
that
dreamed
mountain
going
right
after
now.
alone.
I can tell you that first event is just the first base camp on the mountain. We have no idea where it's going to lead. I think we all have a sense that it's going to be bigger, and that's okay. You know, it started with an Amplify event, and there's podcasts. There's going to be books. There's going to be a lot of assets that come from that and happen, and we don't know what they are, and that's okay. Because what we did is we just dove in. I mean, we're actually living exactly what we're talking about, and you can see it unfold in real time right now.
Yep.
What I love about this whole conversation, if we can just stop for a moment and I can just give you guys a sincere compliment, you're all running empires, right? Several different businesses. You've built this massive world. You're extraordinarily busy, and yet you choose to make your plate even larger, and you choose to use your position as a certain authority figure in real estate to give back even more value, to find a way to contribute your time for the good of other people and expecting nothing really in return. And so good, I mean, I just find that so incredible that you're expanding yourself even further to add value.
It's extremely life-giving.
Yeah. No, thank you for saying that. And I think the key here with our podcast is, there are podcasts that talk about business and there are podcasts that talk about having a big life, and we're combining them. The four of us, our combined revenue is 118 million revenue. We lead big organizations, and we're going to be sharing on the podcast, like the good, the bad, the ugly, and at the same time sharing about how we do that and have a big life. And we're going to be transparent and authentic, and that's what you're going to find when you go and listen to Empire Building.
Well, you can rest assured that I'm a subscriber. I'm a
subscriber. Yes.
Pull out your phones right now.
That's right. Go subscribe right now. It's the yellow
kind of
one.
forceful.
No, really. I mean it. Pull your phones out right now.
Oh, seriously. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Are you a subscriber? And I think I even gave you guys a rating. So
Oh, good. Okay.
not to be a suck up, but
High five bonus points.
So I shared this with Sarah when Sarah was on a few episodes back, and I'm a father. I have two kids, and what you're doing doesn't speak only to female entrepreneurs. I mean that's where you're building your tribe around. But Sarah, I mean, you even mentioned when you guys were on stage, you guys got a ton of messages from single dads, from dads
and husbands.
Yeah, they might have.
Well, dads, a lot of dads with daughters. I mean, they might have actually sent more messages. Honestly, of just like how happy they were as a father that their daughter can look to us. And I mean, I get goosebumps even thinking about that, having that honor, but that they can look to us and say, hey, they can accomplish anything they set their mind to. You can be a mom, you can be a wife, and no, it's not perfect. And no, we're not doing certainly all well at all.
You don't want to eat my home cooking.
Yes, you don't want to
put it out there. Eat my home
good cook.
We all have our things.
We're going to go to Wendy's for food.
Exactly.
I'll pour the wine.
Yeah.
Go to Wendy's for food.
Yep. Exactly. Cooking's not one of mine. But that we're setting the stage for showing that it can be done. I mean, the story that a lot of us hear of the 4-minute mile. I mean, for how many years no one thought it was possible that someone could run a 4-minute mile. And then that first person did it. And I think it was like, And I think it was like 13 or 14 people that ran a 4-minute mile within the next few months, when years and years went by that no one accomplished that. And I look around and I say, and I'm just so honored to be here with my amazing friends and you guys, and just saying that's what we're doing.
And I don't think it's gender specific because, men are husbands and we're not just wives, men are husbands. And, it doesn't matter what your gender is, right? Everybody wants a big life. That's why you guys started this podcast, All In, right? Everybody wants a big life. And for some of us, having a big business funds that really big life. And we want to have fun on the journey and enjoy that part of the journey too.
Yeah, we've all heard the stories of people that look up, 30 years into their careers, 40 years in their career, and they say, what's it for? Right?
That's right.
And it sounds like for the 6 of us on this, talking today, we all imagine a world where no one has to look up and imagine that, right? And have to have that regret. We all imagine a world where every single person listening to our podcast, becoming part of our tribes, consuming the content that we put out for their value and their business value, can look up 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, and they can say, I did counterbalance it all. And it was messy, and there was failure, and yet I had a big life. I went all in on life and business. I created that empire in my personal world, my business world, and now I'm getting goosebumps because that's the vision of all of us as leaders, and we're super passionate about it. And for anyone who's just starting their business, it starts in the mindset. It starts in your head, getting your head wrapped around what is it that you imagine? What's the imagination for your life that you have? And who else is around you speaking into that? And that third party that you mentioned who may not be vested monetarily, but is vested as a friend, as a mentor. Who is that person for you? Who are your 5? Who is your tribe? And I'm going to stop because now I'm just going on and on.
That was a great rant. That was
I actually have a great quote to end because I know we're kind of running out of time here, but it's from Daring Greatly. Brene Brown is incredible.
Awesome.
And this is a quote by Theodore Roosevelt. And it really, I think, sums up the theme of today, right? Which is taking action. And he says, it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who becomes short again and again, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst,
If I could drop this mic, I would drop it, but it's fixed.
Love that.
There's a lot in that one.
Definitely. Hit that back 15 button.
Well, and it's very clear that you guys have really all taken that to heart because you're not out there trying to just impress people with how much success you've had. Rather, you're taking that success and saying, it's not been easy, it's not been pretty, and if I can do it, you can do it.
That's right.
And this is something that you can achieve if it's something that you desire. And you're really just paving that path for people. And it's just inspiring. I'm feeling inspired.
All right, guys, we have to transition into the last segment of our show, which is 3, 2, 1 action, right? We've been talking about this. So we have 3 rapid fire questions that we ask every guest, every show, and we'll just take you guys one at a time. We'll start with question number 1. Joe, you want to ask him question number 1?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, rapid fire rounds. Question number 1. Who is the one person who has had the biggest influence on your business so far?
Ben Kinney.
That's my husband, Jay.
My grandfather.
Gary Keller.
And
that's awesome.
Proudly
Great
so,
answers.
right?
Woo! I wish we could elaborate. That's for different
Interesting, all men
interesting.
that have had the influence, guys.
Oh,
Yeah, that was interesting, Seychelle. Good point.
interesting. All right. Number two. What is the single most impactful book that you've read in your life on your business?
Well, for me, it's cheating. It's the one thing.
I was going to say the one thing.
Written by my
So just in
husband.
the spirit of giving number 2, I would
points
say
here,
leadership
Gary
and
Keller.
self-deception. Maybe simply said, but probably leadership and self-deception. Leadership and Self-Deception is by the Arbinger Institute.
Via, real quick, who is that by? Okay, I had not read that one. That's a new one.
Wrote it down.
All right.
I decided to get into real estate because of reading Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
I gave 2.
That's good. So I think I broke the rules when you guys interviewed me, and I gave 2.
You did.
I'm
Tried
going to
to hold you
give a
back.
third different one. I'm going to give a third different one. But really, like we're talking about action, and the initial part of my career, and even still to today, the model for me was the millionaire real estate agent. And it's still today. And so that's has been such a foundational book on my business.
Awesome.
Love it. All right, so third and final question. We'll let you expand a little bit further on this if you desire. What is the one thing, the one action our listeners can go do following
easy for
this
me.
podcast
Just
right
start.
now that they need to go do to move the needle in their business?
Pick up the phone. Yes.
Decorate their office.
I say all the time that any problem you're having in your real estate business can be solved by picking up the phone.
It's not a matter of resources, but resourcefulness.
Yeah.
Hi,
I would
Quinn.
say I wish I could go back and plan my time off so I know where my work is going to fit in.
I love the kid. This morning I was on a call and my son was trying to peek his head up over the couch from several feet, like behind me.
So cute.
And everyone I'm talking to was just cracking up, and so we all
Just
feel it.
get Quinn in here.
Yeah.
No, she's just ready for me to be done. She's like, you're
Of course.
done.
Tacos. I need tacos.
I need tacos. That's right. We all need tacos.
Awesome. Guys, this has been fantastic. I so appreciate, we so appreciate your time today. There's been so much gold in this episode. And
Yeah, so we're
last
located
thing,
anywhere
run
that someone
down
listens to
where
their
people
podcast.
can
For us, that's
find you
iTunes. We
guys
are hearing
and
from
all
the
your
youngins
content.
that's Spotify these days. And you just get in the search bar and you type in Empire Building, and you're going to see a bright yellow graphic. It's very easy to spot. And you're going to click the subscribe button. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Oh, look at that. Awesome. Well, thank you all again so much for joining us. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the All In Podcast. And as always, go play All In.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode of the All In Podcast. We want to invite you to find all of today's resources from our show page at aipodcast.co. We also ask that you take just 1 minute to leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. This is how we grow and how we're able to bring you the best content each and every week. Now go play All In.